No. Any word from Julie? Okay. Yeah. I think we're good to call the meeting to order.
Motion.
Yep, just call it to order.
Okay.
No,
It's
you don't have to have a
6
motion.
o'clock, so we'll call the meeting to order.
And the first thing would just be adoption of the, I'm sorry, trying to look over here. Adoption of the agenda, and I think we're gonna add, so Ms. Bez is going to present number 1 under B, and then I'm going to, give a short presentation on public hearings after that. So if we can amend the agenda to reflect that. Is that right?
Yes.
A motion to amend the agenda. Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Unanimous?
All right. And has everybody received a copy of the minutes?
Yes.
All right, then just ask for a motion to approve the
I
minutes.
didn't receive a copy of the minutes. I'm sorry.
You don't have a copy of this?
No. That's what I was like.
I don't have a copy either.
Yeah.
No wonder you're looking at me like crazy.
I know. I usually, I didn't see this. Okay, in regards to old business, an approval from the minutes from 10:22.
Motion to approve the minutes from 10:22.
Second?
All in favor?
Unanimous?
It's just up to you.
And
Sorry
then
about
new
that.
business.
Good evening, Planning Commission.
Good evening.
Well, this is not a typical hearing, and even though the cover sheet says that, we're seeking to make a motion to approve the text amendments. It's more of a discussion, kind of a workshop. We want to just kind of review the text amendments, and then, we can add or take away, or, if something needs further discussion. It's basically just to solicit your input. It's kind of it's a workshop kind of meeting, as opposed to an actual public hearing. And so I just want us to kind of be, little, I don't want to say relaxed, but just kind of take this as a workshop to kind of provide input, feedback, because once we kind of solidify where we want to go with the text amendments, then we'll take it to council for them to approve the text amendments, and even at that case, they can add on or take away, or, say there needs to be more restrictive language, or we need to, change this wording and that sort of thing. So it's kind of, meeting is just a, kind of a, what's the word? It's a workshop to, let you guys see some of the text amendments that we're working on, and to kind of get your feedback before we take it to council for any kind of approval. Okay. So,
Am I allowed to ask you questions right now?
yes, absolutely.
Okay. I do have the proposed text amendments in front of me, and the one question that I have is if you could just provide a little more context for what I'm looking at here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Commissioners, can y'all speak into the mic?
Make
please?
sure the green light's on.
My green light was on, but apparently I just didn't have it close enough to my face. Would you like for me to repeat that?
No, I heard you. Kind of the impetus for text amendments, most cities do, they look at their text amendments, they look at their zoning ordinance several times a year, and kind of look at language that might have been either a little confusing, or look at verbiage. Even sometimes we look at our applications and think language is outdated. Like sometimes you might see fax number. Well, no one really uses a fax number anymore. So, this is just an exercise to kind of look at our text amendments to see if there's language that needs to be reviewed, right, to help with clarity. Because, even sometimes out in the field, I've gotten feedback from our code enforcement officers. I got feedback from some of our building inspectors. They'll say things like, hey, well, this person kind of interpreted it like this. And so it's just a way for, like most jurisdictions, they'll either have like a zoning ordinance or ordinance team. Like I was a part of a ordinance team at one point. We were looking at our zoning ordinance, even typos or fonts or things that you're like, that's a misspelling. I mean, I saw something as minor as one of the L's missing from Villarica. So, it's just kind of a deep dive into our zoning ordinance and to look at it and see, what needs to be updated and what needs to be changed or modified.
Thank you for that context.
You're welcome. So,
I just want to add one piece to that. Some of this is also, she said, like applicant driven or employee driven. Sometimes council will also review and look at the way things are practiced over our policy and what we're currently doing. And they'll also provide input and suggestions for us to review. And some of this is relative to that as well.
thank you.
Thank you.
And just so we all know, what you have in black is what the ordinance currently
Yes.
reads, and the red is what the suggested changes are?
Yes, I was just going to clarify as we go down through, kind of looking at this. The black lettering is how it currently reads, and then the red lettering is suggested language or suggested changes that we can make. And I know that Chapter 8 kind of deals with, I kind of went in chronological order of our zoning ordinance, of our code of ordinances of how it's written. So the first section obviously it precedes Article 2, which is Appendix B, zoning, which is primarily what we're going to be looking at. But I decided to kind of just start from the top and just kind of go down through it and read the zoning ordinance. So that was an undertaking reading the entire zoning ordinance. But so I started with Chapter 8 because we do a lot of regulation with business licensing, and some of the things that came up were okay, now that we're going to be taking over kind of the like peddler's permit. Before it was with PD, so now that we're moving it over to us, I kind of evolved some of the language to kind of reflect like our processes. And so
So that just answered one of the questions I had when I started to go. I said, what does this have to do with us?
Yeah.
You go to the police department to get this.
yeah, no,
Okay.
you won't
Very
anymore.
helpful.
They'll still support us in that, but like now, if you want to do have a peddler's permit, you would go to PD. Now we're going to take over that, but PD will still provide the background check for us, but we'll be taking over the process, and so that's why the first page does have.
Got it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's. I'll just kind of read over currently how it reads, and then just mention the changes that I made. Okay, so section 8-118, registration fee application for identification card. Currently, it reads, any persons 18 years of age of older desiring to peddle, solicit, or canvass within the city shall make application with the police department and pay a non-refundable registration fee of $25 per day. How we're thinking it should read, actually, I already see a type. I see I see where it still reads with the police department. Should be
Community development.
yeah, community
department.
development. And instead of fee $25 per day, I just put per occurrence. initially, there was a discussion to just have a flat rate or not charge, because some jurisdictions don't charge, but, you know, I kind of wanted to get a feel for, are we just giving people carte blanche to just come in and once they have a peddler's permit, they're always just here in perpetuity? And I didn't think that that was probably wise or prudent, so I just put per occurrence.
I would agree with that because the per day thing limits, right? When you think about children just selling Girl Scout cookies, per
Right.
day is a huge fund of their fundraiser, right?
Right.
That they're trying to do. But when you talk about peddling like the fireworks truck, they could afford something like that. So, but I get it. There's a big scope. Is there language in the ordinance though that also shows like what this applies to? Because I will tell you, as a citizen, I didn't know till somebody came up and said, "Hey, do you have your permit?" And I'm like, "What permit?"
No, but I can actually, you know, maybe write that as a suggestion that
Yeah.
maybe we need to clarify, because there are special event permits that people can use. And so, let's say the reason why I decided to choose per occurrence is that when they come in, they can state, okay, we're going to be here for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yep.
That would be one occurrence. And so I thought, if you're, you know, doing Girl Scout cookies and you're right there in front of Ingalls or something like that, and your occurrence is that weekend, then that will cover your permit for that occurrence.
Right.
But what you were saying that we should maybe have it,
Definition of what it applies to,
Well,
because
the way it's written, it would apply to everybody over 18 in the city that wants this. So it would, if we want to restrict, if we're restricting it beyond that, it would, I would think it would be a good idea to do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
to say that.
yeah, and my comment was more coming from like as citizens, like not knowing you need. I did not consider myself a peddler or a solicitor when I was fundraising for my children. So some definition to help our citizens understand it, I think would be helpful.
if you, and please feel free to write those things out and I'll collect them at the end. And so just write your name, you know, at the top, and then what your suggestions are. So then that way I can maybe revise the red part. And then, so we'll have several different options to choose from. So that when we do take it to council, they can, you know, we can whittle it down or distill it down a little bit more to where it makes sense.
Right.
Because we don't, you know, obviously we don't want to make it so restrictive to where, like, you know, Girl Scouts feel like, oh, this is an imposing process. But at the same time, in a safety,
You don't want
You
adults
don't
with
want-
minors that don't have a background
right.
check.
Or you know, you want to know, you know, PD wants to be able to say, oh yeah, well, they're having a fundraiser in the park, or they, you know, just for those kinds of things, just so we know what's happening in the city and where, and so that we know that you're going to be there, and so it's fine that you have your permit and that sort of thing. So
Yeah. That may also bring the question to council if they want to have different tiers, to your point. Like, if it's just a fundraising thing from a normal citizen, it might be a $25 occurrence. But if you have something going on for a month or something from something that's going to get a lot of income, it might be an income driver for the city if there was a different level of permit.
that might be covered under
I
the
think
special.
Kevin's got a comment.
Yeah, and we do regulate, like you mentioned, the fireworks. If you set up a business like in front of a gas station, we'll see that all the time. Somebody selling.
Yeah, pine straw or barbecue.
There's a different section of our ordinances that will deal with that, and
Got it.
that is a business license type issue. So
Got it. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I had the same kind of questions about the term occurrence there, because to me, occurrence, you could define occurrence in a lot of different ways. If I am canvassing 365 days a year, and there's no kind of stop to me canvassing, then you could define that as an occurrence. Or, you know, if I'm door knocking, you could count every single knock on a door as a separate occurrence. So it seems to me that that term is extremely broad in the way it could be applied to the applicant in front of you. And I also I'm agreeing with Lisa about defining those terms. Did I pronounce that correctly? Or did I
It's
say your name?
loose. It's okay.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Brand new today.
Yeah,
so-
yeah, totally get it.
So occurrence is a sticky point for me. I do agree with what you're saying that, if you're charging somebody per day, that can become an undue burden on someone selling Girl Scout cookies, for instance. But I also feel like that term needs to be well defined to make sure that everyone knows how to comply with the regulations as they are written. And I also just, I guess for my information, and maybe this is something that I just don't have access to yet because I haven't been able to read the whole stack of amendments that are apply here. But I guess I would like to know what does this not apply to? If we are if for instance somebody is politically canvassing in their neighborhood, asking you to vote for the mayor or vote for whatever. Does this same kind of regulation apply?
Can I jump in real fast?
please.
Okay, sorry. I have some other sections pulled up. So the only thing provided tonight were those texts that we were looking to change, but just for context, it's referring on the application, any person 18 years of older desiring to peddle, solicit, or canvass within the city shall make application. And then again, the changes that she's making, it does say $25 per day versus per occurrence, but the application itself does require name and description of applicant, address, both legal and local, brief description of the nature of the business and the goods to be sold, the name and address of the applicant's employer, if other than the applicant, as well as credentials establishing the exact relationship between the applicant and the employer, the type of vehicle being used, information on any convictions or pending cases of any crime, the dates and times which the applicant proposes to peddle, solicit, or canvass, as well as the anticipated location of peddling. So there is a lot of information requested at the time of application that I do think helps answer your question about occurrence. At least it outlines exactly when and where they're going to be, and that's the information that'll be made available in permit form, essentially, to the applicant should somebody stop them when they are peddling or soliciting to say, wait a minute, are you here? Have you received permit to do this? That's the information they could then provide whomever has stopped them.
And I do understand what you're saying. We can look at, restricting something like not to exceed 2 days or some per occurrence. That would kind of help define, okay, if you're going to be here from Monday to Tuesday, so we can know to look at that you're going to be vacated from the premises, on the second day, or Wednesday you should be gone, and that sort of thing. So if we want to look at, have definitive, 2 or 3 days, because then at that point it could be considered a special event, and then that would be a special event permit, which is a different application.
I don't know how much we want to prescribe in policy, but I would say some kind of guidance as to how to initiate the process, or because if I go on the PD website, I don't see anything, but it says do you know what I mean? Just to make it easier to take somebody from the language to doing it.
Yeah. And that's what we're trying to do, because, currently, it is on the PD. And so once we move it over to us, we will kind of define the process a little bit better. I mean, because currently we don't even have an application for, in community development. So we'll have to kind of look at what's over there right now, what's online, what's available, what PD has, and then just refine that process, because we don't have a process as of yet. We're just trying to kind of distill the language, and we can apply that to the application once we decide these are the text amendments that are going to guide that application. And so it'll reflect, like our text amendments will reflect on the application. So like I said, we're developing that right now because we don't currently have that. And just asking PD, what is the process? When I went in to just, hey, I'm Jill off the street, I want a peddler's permit. And I was told, we just give it to you. And so, obviously, I don't know how much, what they go through. But obviously, that's not going to be our process. And so, we have to kind of shape that process. But the text amendment is going to kind of guide that and inform that process. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think whatever we define occurrence as should probably be reflected on the application. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just put a note here, you know, could be something to not to exceed 2 days per occurrence. So that may help them to know that, okay, well, this permit is for this. However, if it bumps up to the next tier, then it would be considered a special event permit. Okay, so section 8-120, it basically just talks about a registration card. So we're kind of just doing away with the registration card and just have something as a permit that they can just visibly display. It could be like maybe a back sheet of the application that shows, you know, one of our signatures is on it, that they are allowed to be there.
Yeah, in my past, in getting it from the police department, they literally just signed and stamped the form and said, carry this with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we just, that, you know, the next section just deals with, we're just doing away with the language where it says registration card. It's just going to be permit instead of card. So that's pretty much.
Makes sense.
Okay, if we want to go to the next section, where's Appendix B, where we actually get into zoning. Section 2.03, Planning and Zoning Commission. If you go down to number 1, where it says this is kind of the responsibilities outlined by P&Z, what Planning and Zoning Commission shall include. Number 1, conduct public hearing, make recommendations on plan amendments, planned unit developments, subdivision site plans as applicable, and zoning amendments. Well, I just added variances, conditional use permits, just added a little bit more to your your duties and responsibilities. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry. Just give you a little bit more work.
Those who were here before you asked for this, so.
Yes, so
That's okay.
you can thank them.
Well, we kind of did too, because we were like, we're not responsible for the past,
Yeah.
but we can go forward and we can be responsible for the present.
Yeah, and it kind of, you know, what made me kind of want to include that is because every other jurisdictions I've ever worked for, they've had like, you know, any kind of application came before P&Z as a recommending body before it went to City Council for, you know, for any kind of vote or decision. So it just made sense to include those other applications. And as you'll see, where it says conditional use permit, we're going to change that because currently it says special exceptions. And so all of our conditional use permit applications start with CU. So we're trying to clean up the language because sometimes it says special exception, sometimes it says special use, sometimes it says conditional use permit. So we're going to change all of it to reflect and read conditional use permit.
Perfect.
Section 2.06, procedures for calling and conducting public hearings. Basically, the language is public hearings held by City Council as required by this ordinance with regard to rezoning requests, amendments to the official zoning map, applications for conditional uses. I changed it a little bit. Let's see.
Change with regard to regarding.
Yeah. So that was just a little bit of,
And a period.
yeah. Like I said, some of the stuff was very minor, but I still included it. So going down to what I was talking about before, chapter 4, zoning districts, special and permitted and special exceptions. So I have it change section 4.03, permitted and conditional uses, to read conditional uses instead of special exception. Does everyone see that? Okay. So if you want to go to the next page. Basically, it's, you know, like I was saying before, it's just going to be changed from special exception to conditional uses. So everywhere you see special exceptions, it's going to read conditional uses, conditional use permit, and that sort of thing. Okay, so chapter 6, planned unit developments. We're actually going to put, this is going to be like a placeholder because as new uses kind of come into the city that our zoning ordinance currently doesn't even address, you know, we have to start looking at adding ordinances that kind of govern that section. You know, you can think of several instances where 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we used phrases that weren't even heard of 10 years ago. So now with the, you know, the usage of AI, artificial intelligence, and that sort of thing, data centers is becoming more and more prevalent as we use more and more data to house our information. And so now things like technology parks are kind of popping up. And so we didn't really have anything in our ordinance that really addressed, you know, what is a technology park? What is a data center? And so let's say applicant A comes in and they want, hey, you know, I want to put a data center in. So generally, obviously, one of the things that help us make a decision or make a recommendation is that how closely does it fit to our zoning ordinance? Does it follow, you know, what we're supposed to do in our zoning ordinance? Does it support our zoning ordinance? Well, currently our zoning ordinance doesn't have this kind of language for this particular use, and so that's why we're starting to look at adding something. So this is kind of a placeholder. Chapter 6, this will be a new section to kind of talk about that. And so as these applications come in, we can look at that to see whether or not it's meeting that particular section in our zoning ordinance.
Yeah, you'll see this with new technologies and several of the cities I work with. You know, we're dealing with battery storage facilities, something we'd never heard of a few years ago. Data centers on this scale, we've never knew that would exist. We do contemplate in our ordinance data processing centers or something, which, you know, we see as something completely different than massive data storage facilities that require lots of utilities, solar farms. There's just, as technology develops, we just see new uses of land that we didn't contemplate, and we've got to take into account how are we going to, if we're going to allow this, where are we going to allow it, what restrictions are we going to put on it, how are we going to service these uses within the city. So you'll see these, if you're on this board long enough, I think you'll see these changes on a pretty regular basis as technology is just growing faster than we can keep up with it, really, from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, so like we were saying before, even the text amendments, they come about as a result of, a need, use that needs to be put in. And the other thing is that there was something, heavy equipment rentals. For some reason, that was just taken out of the zoning ordinance, but we have, heavy equipment rentals everywhere. We have Kubota so people were asking, like, well, you guys allow it though, but we couldn't find it anywhere in the zoning ordinance. And so that stuff like that is, catching little things like that, like how'd that get written out, of the current zoning ordinance. And so that's what these text amendments do. They help kind of inform language that's needed for new uses, but it also, catches errors and stuff like that, and, tries to correct that. And that's why most municipalities in jurisdictions, they have these kind of text amendments a couple times a year. They'll look at it, or as things pop up, okay, we need to address this, or, come up with a definition for it. So Chapter 6 is going to be kind of a placeholder and we're kind of looking at it. Should it be planned unit development? Should it be a tech overlay? So we're just taking our first dip into this, and so it's not firm in terms of the language that we're going to use it or how we're going to call it, but we do need to identify it and make sure that it is in our zoning ordinance, so as it does come up as a use, that it is meeting what we've decided.
When you come up with these zoning ordinance for like data processing centers, do you contact like other counties that have them, other cities?
Yes, we do. Some counties and jurisdictions have actually, opted or have offered, hey, we have this, and we've actually kind of looked in zoning ordinance. Just say, we don't reinvent the wheel. You know, most of the time something is available somewhere, and so any planning personnel will tell you that we'll look at something and we'll see how well it can fit into our city. You know, if this is, you know, if it's useful, if it's helpful. And so we'll look at some of the most of the time I look at some of the most restrictive uses, because I'm from the standpoint of all development is not good development, you know, and I want to make sure that I'm looking at things in a cumulative impact. And so I'll look at something, I'll look at the pros and the cons and stuff like that, and I'll look at, you know, how we can put it and how it can fit into the city for which I'm, you know, working for. So, yeah.
And GMA, Georgia Municipal Association, and there's a county counterpart to that, they will put out standard ordinances or uniform ordinances. And most governments use a form of that, but you have to be careful. Some of these, like your uniform solar ordinance, was developed by the solar industry, not by the not by the government or the people. So you got to be careful with. You got to figure out who originally authored this. Is it really protecting or accomplishing what you want as a city to accomplish? But there's also Muni Code. If you just Google City of Villarica Code of Ordinances, that's saved under Muni Code, and not every city. There's a subscription to that can be pretty pricey.
Yeah.
But cities of any size use Muni Code, so you can Google 50 or 60 cities on any given issue and see how they're dealing with it.
And I like to go on different websites that are planning driven. Planetizen is one, APA is another, because you can kind of look at different look at who's authoring the particular articles or the particular ordinance. And I looked at one. It was it's kind of like an environmental impact of data centers. And so you can kind of read and determine, like, okay, this was done by a data center, owner, versus, this is, pretty much a, environmental or someone who really doesn't have, I don't want to say a dog in the fight, but someone who's trying to be neutral, but they'll just give you just the raw data. And it sometimes tells you, gives you other sources and stuff like that. But, because this is so new, I'm just looking at a lot of different ordinances, a lot of different jurisdictions that have had these data centers, looking at some of the impacts. And so when we're writing these ordinances, we want to make sure that we're addressing the impacts in some way. Like, okay, we need to make sure that, you're providing reports and that sort of thing. And so, that's kind of how we're looking at zoning ordinance. We look at some other cities that have gone through the process and kind of cherry pick the best language that, fits our city.
And there's also some state regulations on some things. Under state law, it may say a city can regulate this industry, like the games you see in a convenience store, the little game. So state law used to, we could write any kind of ordinance we wanted and regulate those, and then it became a state law, and the state said you can regulate it, but you can only regulate these areas. So most cities had to go in and change their ordinances to only address those issues where the state allowed us to address. So sometimes the ordinance dictated by state law and even federal law, but some things we're free to craft on our own. So.
All right, moving on.
So I'm sorry, were we still talking about that 6.11 PUD data center section?
Yes, but we're going to drop down to chapter 8. Or did you have any additional questions for that section?
I don't have any additional questions. I just have some suggestions about the language.
Sure.
Putting on my former university English teacher hat. There are some things in here that really aren't clear, and there are some things that I think there's one sentence that just it's missing a verb. and I don't want to delay the proceedings here, so is it possible for me to just send you an email with this
Please.
language and what language that I would change about it?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I encourage everyone to not just write on their, text amendments sheets, but send me an email. I mean, even if you write on something and you decide, you think about it and say, on second thought, just feel free to send me emails and everything, because like I said, this is just to tighten up, to make things a little bit easier to read, make things a little bit, make it flow a little bit better. So I welcome all comments.
Okay, I don't have a paper copy of it, but if somebody
No.
does that they would be willing to share, I can make that and hand it to you.
Yeah.
If you don't, that's fine. I can just type something up and send it to you after this meeting.
Yeah,
It's
that
fine.
would be great.
Okay.
We're not adopting anything tonight, so you,
Yeah, so just, feel free to send as many suggestions in, and I'll, incorporate it. Okay, chapter 8, it's very minor. It says 8.13 for outdoor storage. It should be 8.12, so that's a very minor change that I made. Section, the next page, page 4. Again, very minor change. 8.02, number 3. It's just the last 4 words. Villa Rica is missing an L, so that's just a really minor. Okay, section 9, design standards, residential design standards. It currently reads, all new major and minor subdivisions with the exception of planned unit developments shall include the following minimum standards. My suggestion is that all new major, minor, and infill developments with the exception of the planned unit development shall include the following minimum design standards. That came about as I was reviewing an infill design. They were kind of arguing that, actually it wasn't there. It didn't really speak to it in terms of how it should reflect the design standards. And so that section didn't have infill in there. And so currently now a lot of our guys in the building development department are kind of not arguing with people in the field, but they needed the language to make sure that it included.
Consistent.
Yeah, it was consistent, because they were saying, well, that didn't say that in the design standards, residential design standards, that the infill had to comply with that. So I just changed the language to make sure it included infill development, because it needs to look seamless.
Yeah.
You look like you have a question.
Could you explain that one more time, please?
Yeah, the only change that I made to section 9.01, where it says residential design standards, it currently reads all new major and minor subdivisions with the
Yeah.
exception.
Yeah, what was the reason for the change?
Yeah.
So I can add a little bit of context
Okay.
to that. One of the contested disagreements that I at least heard the city side of was in reference to a subdivision that was started but not completed, and a new developer came on, and there was an argument over, well, this isn't major or minor, this is just infill, so it doesn't follow the same design standards. I don't have to follow the same design standards of what's been built here because this is infill. And then gray area.
So essentially, you would the infill design. They would be able to use designs that had not yet been approved to infill the subdivision, without having to go through the process of a major or minor subdivision application process. So essentially, they'd have carte blanche to design whatever type of housing they would want to, because it's infill, instead of having to go through the normal approval process.
That was
Is that-
that was their argument. Correct?
That's exactly it. And we're still kind of, they're still pushing back, saying, okay, well, the minimum says we're still following the fact that, the minimum is 3,100 square feet. But the footprint is different. And my example was that you could
Craftsman versus
right. Well, not only that though.
70s is totally different.
Right. And I said my argument is that you could decide to do 3 stories. None
Or
of the rest of the house.
condominium.
Yeah, 3 stories, or you could do 5 stories and say, oh, it's still 3,000 square feet, but it's a skinny little. It's not consistent with what's out there, and so that's why I added the word infill to kind of tie that up.
Yes,
So.
needed.
Okay, so I mean, if anyone has any other suggestions, also, like I said, feel free to write, or if you think about it later on, and you want to, add additional language, or if you want to wordsmith it further, please feel free to either write it on the paper or you can email it to me. Okay, chapter 11, petitions, permits, and procedures.
Can I ask one more question? Go
Sure.
back to 9.01, and it's
Sure.
probably somewhere in the ordinance elsewhere, but in those design standards, does it also reference like following like restrictive covenants that are already there, or design standards that are there through the subdivisions like HOA? Okay, I'm good then.
HOAs are gonna be a little different because that's kind of the neighborhood policing itself. I mean, the city will have design standards that apply to what type of materials you use. I mean, we will regulate setbacks, road frontage, but we don't regulate some things that a HOA may regulate, paint colors or,
Yeah.
how you maintain your shrubbery or whatnot. I mean, so they're different. They are different, but we do, whatever our development standards are, they would apply to all residential homes or all commercial buildings or the category.
Understood.
Okay, so chapter 11, petition, permits, and procedures. Essentially, I did a strike through for, we decided to remove this right now. It currently reads, a mobile food vending business shall be treated and permitted as a peddler and subject to the regulations thereof. So we did a complete strike through with that one.
Makes sense.
In Roman numeral 4, the only change that I made, it currently reads, no mobile food vendor shall be allowed to operate more than 4 consecutive days in any one location unless they have the mayor or city council's written approval to operate at one location for an extended period of time related to a specialty event lasting more than 4 days. During days of non-operation, the mobile food vendor and all associated vehicles, etc., must be removed from the premises. I just removed the line where it says related to a special event lasting more than 4 days, because I thought that it was sufficient to just read that no mobile food vendor shall be allowed to operate more than 4 consecutive days in any one location unless they have the mayor or city council's written approval to operate at one location for an extended period of time or as a part of a food truck court. I just thought that was enough.
As long as we understand that fundamentally changes the ordinance. I don't think that's just a language change.
What? Right. Because
Okay.
essentially, once you're permitted, as a part of a food truck court, you don't need the 4 consecutive days doesn't need to be there.
Right. What I mean is, before the change, the only way it would be considered is if it was part of an event lasting longer than 4 days. After the change, that's not a requirement. So it is it's a substantial change to the ordinance. I think it's fine. I think it's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Just so that we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Something that's similar that came up, and Sean is very familiar with this, was Chick-fil-A, when they went to remodel.
Oh,
They were there a lot longer.
They wanted to serve basically out of a food truck during
For the
their
whole
whole
summer.
remodel. And that wasn't a special event or anything, it was just
it was just keeping business going.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And they did that in Carrollton. I think they set up a food truck in the Lowe's parking lot when they were remodeling the Carrollton. One. So
Yeah. So once you have that permission, the 4 consecutive days, that's not really, that kind of goes away. Okay. Okay. So the next page, page 5, Roman numeral 7, it currently reads, no more than one mobile food vendor shall operate on the same site per day unless they have the mayor and city council's written approval related to a special event or the site is permitted as a mobile food unit park, aka food truck court. My suggestion is no more than one mobile food vendor shall operate on the same site per day unless they have written approval related to a special event or the site is permitted as a mobile food park, aka food truck court.
It doesn't say the written approval by who, though. So, unlike the previous one that said mayor or city council.
Well, special event is, we have an application for a special event permit or a temporary use permit.
Okay.
So we do have that application and we can just change it to read, related to, we can just change it to like, if they have written
Special
approval
event.
or application or special event permit, because we do have that as an ordinance.
Yeah, because I could say, all I needed was written approval, so I went to Kevin and I got a note. And Kevin said,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we'll define where.
Food truck are you?
We'll define where the approval should come from.
Or if the special event application is the approval, could we maybe just tweak the wording there so that it's not a separate approval? It's
Right.
either they've received the special event application permit,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
it's a permitted site.
Yeah, I'm changing it right now to read special event application or permitted by site. Permitted. Or permitted use. Because there is one going right downtown. It's not a food truck court. It's a what is
It's a
that?
food truck trailer park.
Yes. Yeah, the food hall. Yeah, it's
The
like
food
a
hall.
container. Yeah, it's a food hall. So it kind of has that same feel to it, but
I think there's a spot for the one going right here. This development.
yeah, like
Hey.
isn't it right?
A
Yes.
place to park a food truck.
Oh. Oh yeah. Okay. So we can skip through. I actually crossed through. I was talking to Sean because some of this came from stuff that he was working on, or I guess had some questions to. And so pages 5, the second half of page 5, page 6. Page 7, all the way down to, if we can skip down to section 8-393. That's the next section. The other pages were just, did you, oh, this is the copy that I had, never mind. So you actually, the electronic copy, you had already taken those pages out, did you? Okay, so the next section is 8-393, prohibited conduct and requirement. This is still dealing with the food trucks. So it currently reads letter H, except for ice cream trucks, food truck vendors are allowed only in the downtown central business district. My suggestion is that it should read, except for ice cream trucks, food vendors are allowed only in the downtown central business district unless prior approval has been obtained via special event permit or as part of a food truck court.
Yeah, because Monday Market, they're there on Mondays.
Yeah.
Can I just say you don't need that semicolon before unless? I'm sorry.
That's okay, that's fine.
Hey, I have heard of litigation that has happened between city governments and private businesses over the use of a semicolon. One of my friends was actually called in to testify for that lawsuit, so it matters.
No, I love it.
Context matters. You can
It
read
does.
something completely differently.
It does. And as they say, punctuation matters because it can completely change how a sentence reads.
Absolutely.
With or without correct punctuation.
Can I ask how we determine what an ice cream truck is? If I put a picture on the side of ice cream, if I sell only ice cream, if I sell any ice cream?
Yeah, because there's,
What
yeah.
if you sell boozy ice cream? Can you,
Right.
yeah. Does that, can I
You need
fall
a
under the
special
ice cream?
permit.
I just
truck
need
if
to put
I-
ice
Approved by
cream on
council.
You
what
don't need a
I'm selling.
permit if you sell. Get it?
She's kidding. Redact
Just kidding.
that
Redact
on the
that.
record.
That's not what I meant. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for that rabbit hole that we just went down.
It's a workshop.
It is. It is. Okay, so you're saying that we should maybe define ice cream truck.
Yeah, to the extent that we can do that.
We might have a definition. I just didn't look to see whether or not there was a definition, but we may. I think there is a definition in our definitions of an ice cream truck.
We got some furious fingers flying, looking
Well,
for
think about,
regulations over here.
Yeah,
An-
think
an
about
ice
the
cream truck-
icy, the slushy, the shaved ice.
An ice
You know.
cream truck shall mean a motor vehicle in which ice cream, popsicles, ice sherbets, or other frozen desserts of any kind. So we define it.
So as long
I
as
know I've seen
they
it.
sell ice cream, they're good?
Does it say primarily
I'm
or
the lobster
solely,
roll
or-
and ice cream cup truck.
No, I don't think. Well,
Yeah, there,
My food truck, Kevin, is lobster rolls, and I have little 99-cent ice cream cups.
ice cream
we're going
cup.
to treat you as a food truck and not an ice cream truck.
Right.
Okay.
She said, does it say solely?
solely or only or primarily or
I mean, that's from a legal standpoint, shall is
Shall.
strong language, but it just says shall mean a motor vehicle in which ice cream, popsicles, sugar.
And I don't think it would be solely because that's really restrictive. Most ice cream trucks, they have
So King of
gum,
Pops is
they
all.
have, some of them have candy,
are
some
out.
of them have sodas. I've seen like canned sodas on ice cream trucks, especially during the summer. So I don't think,
Shouldn't it be similar to the ordinance that you have for like bars and restaurants where it's like a percentage of what's on the truck? So then it does define it, and then you don't come into these different.
that would be really hard to regulate
Yeah.
because even when we're looking at the ordinance for vapes and tattoo shops, like the 7-Eleven may have, vape paraphernalia, but
It's not a vape shop.
It's
they're
not a vape
convenience
shop.
Store.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
are they only selling 10% or is it okay now they have like one little rack? So that's really hard to like regulate and kind of it's so nuanced because what if they have vape paraphernalia here and then they have some more, stuff over here.
Yeah.
So
There are
I
a
was
lot
thinking
of-
of what Kevin's comment was to me, though. We're going to treat you like a food truck, right? So then it's like, where's your...
Well, that's right. I mean, with all of these things, at some point you just have to,
Hope for the best.
yeah, I mean, if it becomes a problem, if let's say there's a vendor out there, the lobster roll guy starts selling every day in
And
places we
99
don't
cent
allow
ice
him,
cream
and he tells us he's an ice cream truck and he wants to contest that, and we end up in litigation, guess what you guys are going to see? You're going to see a new ordinance file
Yep.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
didn't-
far, it's never been an issue, and so these things you don't want to have to create work for yourself in some situations where it's not going to be necessary. But a lot of these things they've just never. Where you do see changes is where things have come up and we've had some issues, and that's
Yeah,
why we're
I
addressing
didn't
them.
I didn't think we'd go so deep on that. But to be fair, since I'm the one responsible, I would let them self-define it, just like on an application. Say, are you like, if they say they're a food truck versus if they say they're an ice cream truck, I would let them define that up front.
Yeah, I think if somebody filled out an application and their application said their business was Lobster Dogs, and then they said they're a ice cream truck, then they're gonna get questioned at the
Yeah.
application process.
Yeah, because
The
even
reg-
now, we really, really look at some of the business licenses that come in, and I'm like, that's not really what you're doing, though, is it? You know, and one guy, he had a courier service, and he had his, department, he had his DOT license number, and he has his insurance, and I said, but you're just saying it's an office space. So are you running a courier service? And so I said, because it's a 6,000 square foot building and you just need an office space for that. So just in questioning him a little bit more, we're able to kind of make interpretations in terms of what what you've told us you're doing, and saying, well, this is kind of what it is based off of our zoning ordinance. And so I was able to kind of drill it down, and it was just an office, because there's a building that rents out office space for, quarters, kind of almost like a WeWork situation. And so he said it's kind of like WeWork. So if I need to make conference calls, I can just go in there. He said, but none of his trucks would be on site. But initially, when I started seeing he was giving all his DOT transportation, licensing, I was like, what, it doesn't seem like this is just an office space. But, I mean, we can do the best we can, making interpretations based off of the information that people provide to us, but it's not perfect. And there's so many nuances and so many uses that pop up, and we're like, what is this? But we try to accommodate as many as we can and say, okay, this might file under this use. But when something is just so out there, then that's when we start having text amendments to kind of accommodate that particular use.
The percentage of business is particularly tricky, I think, because I know City of Atlanta, in order to try to get rid of some strip clubs in some various areas, they have an ordinance about the percentage of food that has to be their total expenses or whatever, or total sales. And essentially what they've done is that they've said, for every drink you order, you will be like served and charged for a food item. And those food items are actually never served to patrons. They're just serving drinks, but they're trying to like manipulate their line item to continue to operate that business within the city. So definitely when you get to regulating like the number of percentage of sales or whatever, people are going to try to find a way around it.
Oh, and they will. They'll, yeah. I mean, even when you look at tax, not to keep going down a rabbit hole, when you look at tax time, people get really creative with things like that. And so, you may say that your, like I said, your percentage of, because even a lot of jurisdictions, they don't like to just allow bars. So that's why they, at least half of your sales have to be from foods. But, how are they regulating that? You can't really go in there, each patron, let me see your receipt. You know what I mean? And so that is really hard to regulate. Moving on. Section 8.12, we're on page 8. Section 8.22, we talked about smoke shops, tobacco stores, medical marijuana dispensaries. Okay, so section 8.22, the changes that I primarily made were the, to expand how far away. Currently it reads 300 feet. I changed it to, should be 1,500, but it currently reads 1,000, but in parentheses it says 1,500 feet, measured from property line to property line, from a school, public or private, family daycare, child care facility, youth center, community center. So everything else is pretty much the same except for the distance. And at the last sentence it reads, smoke shop, tobacco stores, and medical marijuana dispensaries shall not be located within 1,500 feet. Currently it reads 500 feet. So those are the changes that I just made it further apart. So we can look at that and say, maybe we need to make it, 3,000 feet. But those are just some suggestions. I was asked to kind of look at it to see if there's a way to space it out, because you really can't, in your zoning ordinance, you can't necessarily say this is not allowed. You can just not put it as a use, and that reads or means that it's not really allowed. And so that's why we wanted to see if we could space it out a little bit more, thereby kind of moving it further and further.
Yeah, if
Out.
I could,
Catch that it
if I
says
could address
1,000 on
something
the
too,
top.
because,
Instead of 1,500.
this predates, everybody on staff that's here tonight. At one time, we had, a downtown overlay district, historical, that covered this historical area. And that, and within that district, we didn't allow certain things. And then when we updated the zoning ordinances, that district disappeared. So there was some concern on council that certain uses they did not want to see in your historical downtown. This would not prevent that. So we may want to consider what districts we actually allow these uses in.
Yeah, it's currently allowed in, it's not allowed in CBD.
You're-
Or C.
I feel like this approach is, you're gonna box yourself in, kind of along, I think, the lines of what, so so if we say 3,000 feet, we're talking about 2/3 of a mile. I mean, when you do that, I don't know if we would have any that would be in compliance with that now.
Well,
Right, and that's well,
So, and when you do that, that's why I would use like the district approach, because then you're not boxing yourself in with space so much.
and you can actually use both, or combinations, but the ones that are here are grandfathered in, basically. I mean, we can't, I mean, if they've been approved and that use has been approved.
I understand
we
that,
can't
but you're
go-
effectively, I mean, if those are the only ones that exist now, then you're in effect saying like, none would have been, I mean, like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It would be, restrictive to the point of exemption. I think that's bad policy.
And that might be an intentional policy for.
That's-
I
I was
understand
gonna
that,
say-
but
That
I think
might be
that's
a
why I
effect
wouldn't
thing.
use policy in that way.
okay, I mean, if we want to kind of, because that is a way to look at certain businesses that you don't want to have either a proliferation of, or you are virtually saying, you're all the way over here in Mars, and okay, you can't exist. So, but it's written in such a way to not encourage proliferation. But if you can meet all of these requirements, then
Which I think we should do for a couple more type of businesses. So the
Yeah, I don't. I
proliferation
think
of
we
them
should
in
do less of that,
Villarica
not more
does
of it.
not continue.
And, vape shops has been the hot topic in a lot of cities lately. And I don't know if we're including vape shops in this. I don't see that, but,
it is. I mean, that smoke
No,
shops.
it probably needs to be,
we probably would need to.
probably
actually
needs
include
to
that
be
term.
added.
No, yeah, I was gonna say we are. It's kind of looked at the same because vape shop doesn't have its own section. It's kind of under smoke shops, and so that was kind of like the worry that
I could see the
I mean, I'm
disagreement
just,
person coming up.
I'm also saying, if that's what we're trying to do, just do it. Just say what you want to do in the policy instead of making it sort of like a maze. Do you see what I'm saying? If we want to ban a shop of a certain type or in a certain area, let's just say that.
Say
we're Instead keeping the of-
existing and no new.
Yeah, and I've done a good bit of research on what, a lot of other cities are dealing with this right now, specifically vape shops. And like Carrollton, what Carrollton did was, all of you will need to get familiar with our permitted use chart in our ordinance. So we've got a chart in our ordinance that will say, in CMU, we allow these uses, or in I-1, we allow these uses or whatever. And then below it, so you'll see the different uses. You'll see a kennel or a barber shop or what, you can imagine whatever kind of business there is. So what Carrollton did was they added vape shops to that use chart as a use, and then didn't check that it was permissible in any of their zoning categories. and then their public announcement was they banned vape shops within the city. I mean, that was their policy, and that's what they intended to do. Other cities will have adopted ordinances just saying,
Did they ban them and the existing ones stayed?
yes, the
It's
ones that are
basically
there.
grandfathered
They're
as
grandfathered
of
in.
X
That's all
date.
you'll ever have.
Yeah, you would never get a new license
For a
for a
vape
vape shop. And then other cities adopt ordinances that basically say, you know, we recognize what a vape shop is, and you can't have one. I mean, we don't allow it in any of our districts. Carrollton was a little more,
Nuanced.
yeah, it was definitely nuanced. I mean, it was, I mean, you actually, nowhere does it say we're banning vape shops, but by recognizing that as a use and not checking it as a permissible use in any of their districts, they, in essence, banned it from the city.
So that's what I'm saying. Like most jurisdictions will not come out and say we will not allow vape shops. They just won't. And so that's why either they'll acknowledge it and then just not put it in any districts, or they'll use, you know, distance as a way to just basically say if you can meet
Make it
all of these things, then
I kind of like Carrollton's approach.
Yeah, and one thing I like about that approach, if there's something you're intentionally not wanting in your city, so let's get off vape shops, and let's say we don't want a rock quarry or something that's, or
explosives.
yeah,
whatever.
something that's going to put off toxic
Yeah.
fumes or what, you know, you come up with something that no one's going to want.
More of.
I like the idea of you actually recognizing that as a use. You say, we're consciously, we recognize that use, and we're not allowing it. I mean, we put in there that it's not permissible in any of these categories, because if you don't recognize it, someone could come and put an application saying, I want to put this rock quarry in this industrial zoning. It's not, you don't have a rock quarry listed anywhere in your permitted uses, and your ordinance says if it's not a permitted use, but it's similar to some other use that is allowed, then staff has the option to allow that use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's that's what policy is. It's like it's restricted. So of course, if something weren't explicitly outlined, it wouldn't be assumed to be, we couldn't assume anything else.
That's right.
But
But by intentionally not recognizing it, or just not loading it in there, you're opening yourself up for that use to be allowed, even though it's not listed as approved, but it's not listed as it's not listed, period.
Yeah. But so if I say that we can't be within 3,000 feet, let's say, of, and then I list buildings and it's not possible within city limits to be 3,000 feet away from all of them, I don't know why we're doing that instead of just saying, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
yeah, we shouldn't do that.
yeah, I wouldn't try to like circle a business or a type of business with policy. I would just make a policy to address that type of business.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and if that's how, you know, I just didn't feel like I should just write that we shouldn't allow it, you know, so that's good to hear. That's good to, because, you know, you never know what the temperature or the appetite for really, really restrictive language is, and so that's kind of why this workshop, you know, because we want to hear from, like, is this too restrictive, or do you guys want to go a step further?
Well,
But-
I'm not sure where I would fall in that. I don't want to make a statement about that, but I think by being direct, then the conversation that takes place is a little more straightforward.
Yeah, I just
Council's
concur.
denied every vape application since I've been up here. That's kind of their appetite for it right now.
I feel like the nuance thing is the way to go. Just makes it easy, and then we don't have to.
Do you mean the direct
Sub-
thing or nuanced?
The nuance like Carrollton did, because then we don't even have to worry about it coming up for a public hearing and comment when we already know what the public opinion is on it, and it's already in the ordinance, nuanced. So then it squashes the issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I also agree. I also think that we should take a stand for the things that we, believe in as a city, instead of, and also I just really don't want to be doing trigonometry to determine some kind of allowable use for a particular space.
Also, can I just make a note? I don't think medical marijuana and tobacco have any business being in the same ordinance whatsoever. I think that's absolutely outrageous. I think you're, in one case, something is very tightly controlled and regulated. I think maybe there was a time where that would have been, like years ago, it would probably have made more sense. But I think now it probably needs an update.
I agree.
Yeah, and I don't think we've actually had an application for any of the three uses here in the last few years. I think there are some smoke shops in town,
Yep, there's one right there.
but I do not believe we have
Huh?
any
Is that on a vape shop?
medical.
It's called We Smoke, I think, right here. It's like right behind downtown.
You know,
Is it a medical marijuana or just a smoke
I don't
shop?
think we
No,
have any
just I
medical
think it's
marijuana
a,
there.
no, I don't think it's medical, no. I think it's a smoke
Smoke
vape
shop.
shop, but
Yeah.
it's like right here.
It's
Now-
called a cigar shop.
Yeah,
Now, if you-
cigars.
If you have
Okay.
traveled out west in the
It's
last
South
couple
County.
years, if you've traveled out west in the last couple years,
Colorado,
Yeah.
Montana,
LA.
Montana, LA,
you will see medical
Arizona.
marijuana dispensaries everywhere.
It's not even medical anymore because it's legal. You know, it's legal, recreational, it's legal. So it's, you know, I mean, it's one of those tricky things because hemp is legal in all 50 states. And
Right.
so
well, there's
CBD
even
and
businesses here that say
Yeah.
legal THC.
well,
Or
yeah.
no, they
and-
say, I saw one that says legal THC, and I'm like, how did they get that sign
Yeah, that's-
approved?
Yeah.
Well, there was a change in Georgia law that went into effect July
Yeah.
Yeah.
1st.
It's legal. That's the other problem with sort of having this together.
yeah, how it's couched together. Yeah. I can take, yeah.
So- Some of the,
As long as it comes from hemp as the origin instead of the other cannabis plant, and as long as it's less than
Percent THC.
3.3% in weight,
Yeah.
and it's of the overall product, then it's legal.
Yeah, because you'll see CBD, it says, you know, it'll say it was,
yeah, we
full
had, there were some
spectrum or
changes in
whatever,
Georgia
yeah.
just this summer that I think some things that were being sold would not be allowed to be sold now,
That's correct. Yeah.
so. That are probably still being sold now, but
Mm-hmm.
that's a police, that's a,
Yeah.
that's a
I'm gonna,
Captain
like, put a
Mansour
pin in
issue.
this one. Further discussion.
So I don't think you totally take it out, but maybe you change the term.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you guys want to just email me like all of your thoughts because you know
I don't think you fully take it out.
Well, I think what Andrew was saying was that they essentially should be two
separate-
separate regulations.
yeah
And two separate sections of the code. But I also, I don't know if you said something about the difference between medical marijuana and also like recreational, either THC or CBD uses, because those should also, I think, it might require some thought depending on pending Georgia state legislation around how those two separate things are governed as well.
Yeah, we're actually preempted by state law on some of that. So, I mean, state law addresses those issues, and the police departments, it's up to them to enforce those issues. So.
right. So I'm gonna put a pin in that one so we can come back for further discussion. And then the next sections, 8.28, is similar in terms of distance. And just to preface this, I was asked to come up with a discussion point for small box discount stores. You know, you see a lot of people commenting on, you know, Dollar Tree Capital or Dollar General Capital, you know, and that sort of thing. And so I just kind of, this section is just kind of taking a stab at how we should look at the development standards and how small box discount stores should be looked at and what they should, or what the intention of them should be. recent legislation has been pushing them to offer more fresh fruits and vegetables as opposed to just a lot of packaged, chips, sweets, sodas, and stuff like that. And so a lot of them actually have started taking sections of their store and offering fresh produce. And so
Don't you just call that a convenience store then?
not really, because convenience stores don't have they're not synonymous with small like discount stores like Dollar Tree. Like 7-Eleven and Dollar Tree aren't the same thing. Convenience stores, because currently our zoning ordinance, convenience stores, sometimes you can have a gas station this along with it, so it's not looked at the same. So this section is just to kind of figure out how we want to approach that, because there's some thought that we didn't want to have a proliferation of discount stores, not trying to call out any stores by name,
I
because
think
I
we
mean
may
I
already
don't
do
have
that. I think
a
we
preference
may-
won't. No, but I'm just saying, I'm just using it as an example,
Yeah.
because you did mention, couldn't it be a convenience store? So that's why I use it
No, and I get it. The
by
pricing
name.
came.
Yeah, and
It's
I
definitely
use 7-Eleven also as a like if they sold vape paraphernalia. Not trying to call out 7-Eleven or anything. I'm just kind of making sure that I was making a point that convenience stores can sell those things, but to your point, small box discount is looked at a little bit differently. It's not considered the same thing as a convenience store.
Does this lump together so you got your Family Dollars, your Dollar Generals, your Dollar Trees, and then you've also got the thing at the corner at the high school that's like a salvage store that sells discount stuff, and thrift stores that are run by churches, and I'm just asking to understand
No.
if it all.
Not necessarily, because thrift store and small box has a specific definition. You know how we have big box retail has a specific definition, like Target, Walmart, things that are over a certain
Like
square footage.
inventoried,
Right.
inventoried SKUs.
Yeah. And
Maybe
so
that's a way to
they
define it,
have
too.
a specific definition of how they're defined. So, your thrift store that's downtown, or this old house, now they turned it to adaptive reuse. Now it's a thrift store. That doesn't fall in the same category.
Yeah, and what drove me to that was foster a community-based approach, so that had me start to think about that, but I understand now.
Yeah, and we're not, attacking Trader Joe's or anything like anything like that. Even though it's a small footprint, it's not the same thing.
Right.
Can I ask just a question about do we have good information about the possibility of grocery store deserts in Villa Rica? Because I have an inkling that there are actually, just speaking to some of the plans that you've outlined here, that there may be a possibility that there are certain families and certain homes in the city of Villa Rica who don't have walkable access to fresh groceries in the city. Is that, do we know about, has that analysis been done?
Not to my knowledge, it hasn't.
Okay.
I want to preface, I've only been here for 6 months, so I don't know if someone did a study prior to that or not.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just gonna put, we can further discussion for the small box discount stores.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that definition, because I think that's going to be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Bowden tried to regulate something similar, and it's a challenge.
It is.
Maybe it's a nuance.
Okay, page 9, section 9.03, under multifamily, where it says garage, if you just drop down to proposed, currently it doesn't read, and this has happened out in the field. A lot of the guys from our building department have gotten into kind of wrangled with builders out in the field from how they measure the garage depth. And if we're saying it needs to be 20 feet, we specify it needs to be interior dimensions. So they don't include outer walls. 'Cause we've seen measurements as much as 6 inches shorter than what is supposed to be on the plan. And so then we have all of these unnecessary administrative variances, administrative adjustments that have come as a result. So just wanted to make sure that we make sure that we say interior dimensions. And so that's the only change for that. Chapter 11, petitions, permits, and procedures. Need my glasses. Currently it reads, in the event that Planning and Zoning Commission feels that additional information is necessary in order to make a decision, it may instruct the applicant or city staff to conduct additional studies or seek expert advice. The cost of such studies shall be the responsibility of the applicant. I reworded it to, should the community development director, because obviously at this point, by the time it gets to you guys, they should have had all of their special studies. And so I felt that it was kind of after, like, it shouldn't get to you guys planning and zoning, and then they need a traffic study or they need like some environmental done. That should predate before it gets to you guys, because that helps us make our recommendations. Because we're
Yes.
looking at things and we're like, okay, well, you don't have a site plan, you don't have a traffic study, you
Agreed.
don't have, so I just changed it to, instead of it, you guys making the decision of needing additional studies, I just reworded it that it should,
Absolutely.
yeah. So that's the only change there.
So what if, and this is not me trying to like, I guess because yes, ideally that would be what happens, that the community development director would be the person who asked for that. But let's say there's an applicant in front of us who we really do feel like, they've checked all of these boxes and then there's one last box that they didn't check. So this would essentially remove our ability to make any suggestions for additional studies.
No, that would remove your, no, you can ask, the applicant about certain things that aren't patently clear in whatever they provided. And you can even condition or introduce conditions to the project that would make the applicant, your recommendation of approval or denial is contingent upon them providing, and you can actually condition the project to read such.
Okay. Just
So-
want to make sure that if something happens and there's a study that's missing when it comes to us that we really feel like needs to be done and needs to be contingent on our approval, that we have the ability to continue to make that suggestion, and that's not wholly taking it out of our hands and giving it to someone else.
Absolutely. No, you do. As a matter of fact, staff does provide conditions of approval, but if you all decide that, I think we need another condition to address performance or whatever it is, then we can write that in as a condition.
But keep in mind, we're only a recommendation, because we can totally agree here unanimously, and then it can go to council, and they can disagree.
Right.
Right. My
We're
question
just the
is,
recommending
are we
body.
going to put that into, are we adding this to the language that deals with conditions? Because if not, we're just taking out, like, we are doing what she described, and we're saying, but we can still put that on as a condition.
A recommended condition.
And I'm going to talk about that in my presentment next, about some things that you guys can do in your recommendations. But what I think staff is trying to do is
Limit what comes here.
give them the authority to go ahead and demand that before it gets to you. So that, they get, that way you've got better information to make your decisions.
I understand that, but it would still be them deciding under which circumstances those would be required.
That's right.
Right.
So you may hear something in the presentation that makes you think, well, maybe we should do this kind of study, or maybe we should require them to do X, Y, and Z. You're going to have the authority to do that, or to put that in your recommendations, to ask council to
Yeah.
require that.
Okay. All right. That's why I would I would just make that clear in the language that we have that deals with conditions.
You're gonna have that right.
Yeah, you already have that right
under-
to do so.
And I'll cover that in my, it's gonna make a little more sense, I hope,
Yeah.
after
but
my
ju-
presentation.
Okay, just to be clear, I'm just saying special studies would be referenced in the language, but I know we have the ability to recommend conditions, but special studies being there with that language is what I meant.
Yeah, I just to add to that, I kind of had Sean write down, even to add more flexibility, looking at should city staff or the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay.
That would accomplish it, yeah.
Okay, I just wrote that in. Okay. Okay, the next section is basically about text amendments, and the initiating party currently reads the following procedures in accordance with Georgia Planning Act applies to a proposal to amend or partially repeal the text of the zoning ordinance. Initiation of proposal. The proposal may be initiated either by the city council or the Planning and Zoning Commission. I just added the Community Development Department.
Can we change that to say city staff? And the reason I say that is because, the peddler's permit, for example. Okay.
Okay. City staff.
And historically, we've even had a citizen come to us with a proposal to amend, and we've entertained it. I mean, in fact, it ended up being an amendment to our ordinance.
Yeah, and
So
that happens too when they
You-
do a map amendment.
it
when
would
they
be
come in.
it would be very rare for either council or your body to come up and say, I want to amend this ordinance and this is what I want. It could happen. I've never seen it happen. Usually what happens is exactly this. Staff, there's been a problem and staff comes up with a draft for you guys to consider, and y'all talk about it, and y'all may recommend changes to it, but it would, in practical, in reality, I rarely see something initiate from this body or from council directly. They may instruct us, let's look at this and let's come up with an ordinance that addresses this issue, but it's usually staff that comes up with the language.
Okay, so Roman numeral 3, where it says additional information, it currently reads at the discretion of the Planning and Zoning Commission or the Joint Committee. The applicant may be required to provide additional information or studies to demonstrate the impact that will occur as a result of the proposed development associated with the amendment. I just changed it to read at the discretion of the Community Development Director or the Joint Committee. So should we change it to staff? Okay.
And it's
again-
just not to call a position out by title. I'm just
Right.
careful with that.
Yeah.
That's all.
And again, are you offering water? Yes, please, for me. But what I wanted to say was,
I'm okay, thank you.
again,
Y'all need water?
No, I'm fine.
Andrew, you need water?
Sure, thank you.
I'm over here. I'm sorry. That's the first time I've coughed in the microphone all night. I've been very careful. Just again, the same thing that we said a minute ago. Would like to not limit our ability to also continue to request additional information, and so would like to have the persistence of language. Thank you so much.
Sure.
In there as well, just to make sure that we're not boxing ourselves
Appreciate
into
it.
a lack of power to do that.
So it should read at the direction of, at the discretion of staff, P and Z, and currently reads or the joint committee, but Should we take or the joint committee out, or should we just kind of do a common add-on?
Where are we?
I would be very careful taking joint committee out of any, just because it was so newly added,
Okay.
just at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Is
it's going
it
to
joint
currently
committee
read.
or joint commission? Just trying to keep our language like special exclusion and conditional use.
If it's the group that is otherwise referenced, it's joint commission. You're
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure our language is consistent.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Commission. Okay. We're almost to the end. Section 11.06, development standards variance. Currently it reads dependent upon city council approval. My recommended suggestion is dependent upon P&Z recommendation, because that's usually the first step.
I don't have anything about the structure of that to say, just that the language of the revised section still says to be authorized without the approval of the council, where it should say commission.
Where? I'm sorry, what?
Uh,
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Sorry.
In no case, that sentence, okay. In no case shall any variance to the terms of this ordinance be authorized without the approval of the council. Are you saying,
I think kind of we tweaked this section to include like a step one for dependent upon P and Z recommendations. So to be consistent in that paragraph with that heading, I think she's saying change council to P and Z, commission, and then you would do a drop down kind of step two
Okay.
for council approval.
okay, so then, yeah, so without the recommendation first,
Yeah, you
Yeah.
could just say, without the approval of council, after considering planning and zoning's recommendation.
okay, yeah.
and council appears twice in that paragraph too, so we probably have to do some other wordsmithing with the second one.
Yeah, so I'll just add a sentence, because obviously council makes the approval or the denial, but you all make the recommendation, and so I'll just add a sentence to kind of, further that process, or kind of show that it's kind of like a two-pronged process.
Yeah, and just to, so y'all know a little background, variances maybe at some point came before this body, but it's been a while. Since I've been out here, they've been going straight to council. And some of council will say, they've told me that the reason they changed that was, zoning's more of a long-term, a developer's looking at buying a piece of property and he's got these plans, so it's more of a long-term outlook. A variance a lot of times comes up, I'm building a house, and I just realized I don't have enough, I need to encroach 2 feet into a buffer zone or something to build this house. I need a decision right away. That was their justification for taking y'all out of the loop and going straight to them. So, in reality, maybe there is more time, and so we're bringing those decisions back to you, or at least your consideration. But just remember that sometimes there may be a time crunch on some of these issues, and I think staff does a good job of getting to you as quick as we can get them to you. So.
And I think when it's something so small like that, we also have a process called administrative adjustment, where it allows us to look at something that doesn't exceed like 15% of what's allowed, and then we're able to do it at a staff level. So, I don't think we'll bombard you with every little thing that comes across that needs some kind of relief from the zoning ordinance. But, if it does rise to the level of needing a variance, then you all will be the recommendation. It'll go to you first for a recommendation.
is there a possibility that that could make the city council meeting shorter? Because that's one of my kind of pet main concerns, is that the city council meetings are currently not very accessible unless you have a sitter for, 4 to 6 hours to come to those conversations. And I don't. I have a 3.5-year-old. I just don't. And a lot of the debate that happens at the council meetings is over variances.
So three things really that we're doing to help address the length of the meetings. Starting in January, our work sessions are a week prior. So I think
Love it.
sometimes when we get caught up in those questions in that moment, we're going to have a week, right, to have those questions asked and answered if they're not asked and answered on the day of the work session. The second thing, we are working on drafting a public comment policy. Currently, we have nothing other than, some language that's stated right before the public comment period is open, but that's about it. And then we have a standard 3 minutes, but we're gonna formally draft and approve a policy in December. That'll be effective in January as well. And then finally, as Kevin will show shortly, in his public hearing presentation, we're gonna get back to really holding public hearings as intended by our ordinance. And I think that will truly shorten the length of some of the meetings.
Yeah, and to be clear, the reason that I'm saying that is not because I think that the city government should be making more decisions without the input of the public, but really for more of it. Like, we should be able to have the most important things in front of our citizens, allow our citizens to comment on the most important things. And I don't think that that is happening with the length of the current meeting. So just to clarify.
And that's pretty much all I have. If you all want to, like I said, write on it. If you want to review a section again and kind of think about it and get back to me for additional comments or wordsmithing, or even if you see something in the ordinance that we haven't included, because we're trying to do things by chunks, simply because it is costly to update a Muni code. It's expensive, and so we want to try to get the most pressing changes done first.
Appreciate your work on this.
Thank you very much, and I'll turn this over to Kevin.
Yeah, thank you for your work.
All right. I've got this as a PowerPoint presentation, but to do that, y'all would all have neck problems by the end of the evening because the screens are behind you. So does everyone have the handout? And I'll just go from that. And I'll go fairly fast, but, everyone is fairly new to this, or brand new to this commission. So, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be, I went to law school and I didn't understand a lot of what goes on with planning and zoning. I think zoning is extremely complicated. Some of the zoning issues that come up are very complex areas of law. So don't be afraid to ask questions. You can email me at any time, and I try to be responsive if you've got legal questions. But the purpose of today is to just give you the basics. There's no way, unless y'all want to stay here until you have to go to work tomorrow, there's no way for me to get in depth on all of this stuff. So this is just going to be, touching the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully gives you a better understanding of what's going to come before you. So Villarica actually does, and I go to a number of cities, Villarica does a really good job, I think, with the way they handle their public hearings. The problem is every part of our meetings has gotten longer and longer. I mean, we're no longer just a little town. We're still small, but we're dealing with big city issues. And you've got a lot of people that want to talk and put in comments. So you're right, our meetings are getting long, and by the end of the night, I don't know how effective they are. In my litigation life, I have some judges that will go all night long, and I think that's horrible because your brain's a muscle, and that muscle in a trial and in this setting, that muscle is working nonstop. And none of us are at our best late at night if we've been working hard, and we might not be making the best decisions. So we're trying to address that. And we've got an ordinance that tells us how to run these meetings, and we haven't been great about actually following the ordinance. And I think if we follow the ordinance, it's gonna give everybody a fair opportunity to be heard, but it's also going to make our hearings much more efficient. So the first thing I address in here, and some of this, I initially prepared this for council. So some of it will not come before you, but there are certain things that require public hearings. Some things don't. Some things council can just vote on. They can have a motion and vote on, but there's some things that require public hearings. It requires us to hear from the public or people that want to speak either in for or against the project. And these are adoption of the budget, zoning decisions, and zoning decisions are rezoning. So, and I'm going to define these later on. Variances, special exception permits, and a zoning decision also includes changing of a zoning ordinance. So although we may not be changing a specific parcel, if we're changing a zoning ordinance, then that is considered under Georgia law as a zoning decision. So it would require a public hearing. Appeals or variances under our sign ordinance, alcohol license, the initial permit at least requires a public hearing. And council can elect to have public hearings on other things that the law does not require. So, sometimes there may be an issue where they just want public input, and you'll see this. I mean, we have issues that have come up that did not require public hearing, and we've decided there's a lot of people here. Let's go ahead and have a public hearing. Let's see what the public says about this. Council may need it just to get a feel on which way they need to go on a decision. So, although the law doesn't require it, we may have one. So section 2.06 of our ordinance defines how we conduct our public hearings. So the presiding officer, head in this board would be the presiding officer. In her absence, someone else would be the presiding officer. But they would announce we're going to have a public hearing. So if we were to have one tonight, you would see on the agenda it would have a public hearing. It'd be VO something or whatever their codes are. You would call we're announcing we're going to have a public hearing on this issue. The presiding officer should give a brief summary of the process. Now, if it was like tonight where we've only got a couple people here and they're very familiar with how we run public hearings, so they probably understand the process because they come to our meetings, but you would need to give some brief summary. We're about to have a public hearing. We're going to hear from the staff first, and then we're going to hear from the applicant if the applicant's here, and then we'll have an opportunity for the public to speak either for or against the proposal. All right. If the applicant may have multiple things on their application for a public hearing, so somebody may, for example, they may want to be annexed into the city. They may want to annex a piece of farmland into the city and have it rezoned to commercial. And their project, they may require 5 or 6 variances. So theoretically, you could hear all kind of things in one public hearing. So there would be no need to have multiple hearings for this one project. We could hear all of this public hearing, have one public hearing that deals with this project and all the various aspects of that project. Different standards apply to those decisions, and we'll talk about those later, but we could deal with it in one public hearing. All right. I'm going to skip over a couple pages. So first, you will normally hear from Sean or someone else on staff that will explain the application. Sean usually puts together a pretty detailed proposal for you to, you'll usually see it ahead of time, actually. But during the actual hearing, he will come up and give a brief summary of what you're about to hear and what the applicant's asking you to do. Everyone that speaks from the podium here, this is a public record. When we're having these hearings, we're not in a court. This is actually a courtroom on Fridays. But it is a public hearing, and it's just like having a trial, because these decisions can be appealed later. They're not necessarily appealing your decision, because you're only making a recommendation, but they may be appealing council's decision, and what is said in this hearing will be part of that record. So it may have to be explained in front of a Superior Court judge at some point. It's why a decision was made a certain way. So just keep that in mind. That's one reason we ask people to identify themselves, because that is part of the record. Also, when people come up here, they may express something that we need to follow up on, that staff needs to call and address later outside the hearing, and that gives us the information to do that. So everyone should state their name and their address. People aren't great about that, but that's kind of your job, is to say, can you just state your name and address for the record? The applicant will speak next after Sean. He or she is allowed 10 minutes to present their whatever they're asking for. They could present 5 minutes and reserve 5 minutes, or they could present 2 minutes and they get a total of 8 minutes, however they want to use that time, but they have the right to reserve time.
So is it important that we call out those rules at the beginning of each?
Yeah, they're going to be in writing, available to be, it'll be sitting somewhere, so it's going to be in writing somewhere for everyone to see.
And then since we're online as well, it's probably important it's stated so that people online, the comments, understand why something gets,
That's right.
reserved or limited.
And I'll defer to Ashley. I mean, before the hearing, when I said we're going to give a brief summary of how we conduct the hearings, that's part of it. And I'm happy to do that, or you can do that, but you just decide how you want to handle that. But somebody needs to actually explain. You're pointing to me?
I was just going to say, I actually did a cheat sheet
Yep.
for the mayor, and I'm happy to give a copy to you as well. That's just and you can just read it verbatim. It's a cheat sheet essentially of this presentation, and it just tells everybody this is exactly how it's about to
That's awesome.
go.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here's where we really have not been following our ordinance. So far, we haven't really been strict on the time. To be honest, in this body, time has not really been a big issue. Especially the last few meetings, y'all been very efficient, but we do have some time issues in front of council. But really, that hasn't been that much of an issue. But this is where we have gotten off track, really, in front of all bodies on how we conduct our hearing. After the applicant speaks, we should be asking who is here in support of the applicant. We've been just letting everyone speak for or against, and it's been just a hodgepodge of people.
And you can't keep track.
And it is hard to keep track. So this does and this is in our ordinance, so we really should be following this, because theoretically someone could appeal a decision saying you didn't even follow your own policy. I mean, you had a hearing, and you didn't even follow what's in your own ordinance. So that's one reason it's important to follow this. And
Is that also who's in support of the applicant, and then you would do who's not in support, or?
we will, so.
Okay.
Yeah. So you may see in certain applications, there's certain projects that the public's more interested in than others. Some of them are just not controversial at all.
Lately.
So, if somebody wanted to come in and build 5,000 square foot single family homes and over 2-acre parcels, you're probably not going to get a lot of pushback on that. But if somebody comes in and wants to put a liquor store next to the First Baptist Church, you may have the First Baptist Church here. You may have a whole congregation or a
Yep.
big group of people here. So just be prepared for that, and our ordinance contemplates that. So if you see, if there's 100 people here, there's no way we can hear from 100 people and get done in the evening. So what we're supposed to be doing is if it's obvious we're not going to be able to get done in 10 minutes, with those in favor, then you can ask to hear from a spokesperson of those in favor and see a show of hands. So it's going to be obvious. I mean, if 90 people are here against the project, you know what they're going to say. I mean, after hearing from one or two, you've got a pretty good feel for the flavor of what's in front of you. But you can request that a spokesman be chosen to make the presentation of those in favor of the project. Same thing for those against. When people speak, they should only be, and this is out of the ordinance, they should only speak on the merits of the application. We've really gotten off track on this in some recent proposals. The comments addressed only to council and not to the audience. That happens, I haven't seen it happen, well, it has happened here.
Yes, it has, yeah.
Yeah, it's happened here. Not so bad, but it's happened. There should never be personal attacks against anyone. And if there are, then the sergeant at arms, and we would just have to address who that is, should address that. And if, shouldn't be talking about facts or opinions irrelevant to the proposed application, especially you guys. I mean, y'all don't have a lot of control on what the public comes up here and says. But y'all need to be careful what you say, because your decisions are part of the record and can be appealed. So, and if someone gets way off track, we're allowed to give them a warning, and if they refuse, and I haven't seen it to the extent where we would really ask someone to leave. I mean, I haven't seen that. People may say stuff we don't want to hear. That's part of being in public service. That's okay, but if they start making threats or personal attacks, then that's different. Okay. Following those in favor, then the presiding officer should call for comments in opposition to the application. They should be given we're required to give a minimum of 10 minutes. Okay, so we need to give everybody, and whatever time we give, we have to give equal time to both sides. But we need to give 10 minutes in favor, 10 minutes against. If we decide to go more than that, then we just have to give the same time for both sides, opposed and for. And again, if you've heard from all those in favor, there's still 100 people in the room that haven't spoke, ask for a show of hands on who's here in opposition to the application, and if it's obvious that they can't be all heard during that time frame.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. You can finish your thought, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay. If it's obvious that there's going to be 100 people here opposed, you can again ask for a spokesperson to make the presentation, and they should stick to the time limit.
Let's say that we have some something coming in front of the commission that is pretty unanimously, people are unanimously in favor of, for instance. And you mentioned that if you give 10 minutes to one side, you have to give 10 minutes to the other side. Does that, could it be possible that those 10 minutes aren't used?
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
If there's no one here.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Like every single person
But we're
in
not
the
gonna
room is
we're
here
not gonna
for it.
say at 2 minutes we're gonna say, okay, we've heard enough. We're gonna allow you at least 10 minutes. But if there's only one or two people here on either side and they're done talking, we're not gonna sit here for another 8 minutes to let the other side talk or to go to the next step. Yeah, you're right.
Just want to be clear. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So after we've heard from those either in favor of and those against, then the zoning administrator should be called back to the podium to answer any questions that y'all might have. Y'all usually have some questions. Y'all have asked some really good questions. So continue that. And that would be the time that you ask from staff or myself if there's a legal question. That's the time for y'all to ask questions. And then final, if the applicant has any time left or reserved any time for rebuttal, we can hear from the applicant. And then the applicant can answer any additional questions you have. All right, so once we've gone through that process, even with a big crowd, we should be done with the hearing in 30 minutes or so, if we follow that process. There are times where you don't want to, and y'all have that discretion, but exercise it sparingly, I would suggest. You have the right to reopen for limited purposes. So in your discussion, so you've heard from everybody, and one of you may ask a question that leads to, well, we didn't address that. So you may open it up for a limited purpose of addressing that question.
As a question, Kevin, because I know obviously when this gets posted, there'll be comments about the process, right? Because I think it wasn't clear. I think when this presentation was given, it wasn't live streamed where you could hear it all. So now it will be. So I foresee some questions. So I just have a question that I think will be one of the questions asked. In the coming year in January, is council and these meetings with having work sessions a week in advance, will there be a means, tool for people to submit in support of or in opposition of, for people to review prior to, so that maybe then there's a forum so that people don't feel like they're being silenced?
Not in lieu of
No.
any legal requirement.
Right.
However, absolutely, like that's kind of
like a general
intentional, right? Having that
box,
extra
and
week.
then giving this is the subject, is this, and then it can be given to the commission prior, okay, we've read it.
Yeah, and staff takes comments, and you'll see in Sean's reports, he includes in that report, they haven't heard from anybody for or against. I mean, he usually includes a section in there, I believe.
And I think that's important to point
People
out,
that
because I
bring it
haven't
out.
noticed that, but I think that's really important, right? So that people do feel like there is a forum, they're not being silenced, there is a method to get it, and everyone gets it prior to
Now-
voting, so we've seen it.
Yeah, now that's comes in, but that is not, that may not be part of the public record, okay?
Right.
It-
But anybody
it-
can stop
it
you in the
could be-
street and say, here's my opinion on this, I wanted to
Yeah.
tell you it.
Now,
So
Sean's-
providing a
Sean's
forum.
report does become part of the public record. So
Absolutely.
if he's got a section in there, then that is part of it. So after we've heard from everybody, we're going to close the public hearing. And that's how you close it. You say, I'm closing the public hearing. At that time, you can go ahead, and usually we will go ahead and have a vote, and you're voting to recommend either approval or denial or approval with conditions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, okay? So there may be a reason that you delay your vote. You could be asking the applicant to go back and do another study or something, and so they'll need to come back to see you. But there could be times where we're under time limits that this has to get before council because their application's been pending for a certain amount of time. And what we don't want to have happen is something approved because we didn't get to it on time. We want something approved because we actually approved the project, it could be a project that we don't want approved, and we need to get an official vote on that. That's kind of my job and staff's job to remind y'all when we're in those situations, so. All right, I'm going to next get into what you actually might be making decisions about. The first, and what's been most common so far, is a rezoning request. So a rezoning request is and I put the definition there in here, is a request for an amendment to the official zoning map. So have each of you seen the zoning map?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's a color-coded map, and it tells you the different zoning districts within the city. So if I've got a piece of property that is zoned C1, but I want to put a use that's not allowed in C1, it's only allowed in C2, I would be asking you to rezone my property to C2 so I could put whatever kind of business I wanted on the property. And I try to put an example in there. In our statute, it says what you should be considering when a rezoning request comes before you. The first thing that all of you should be familiar with is the comprehensive plan. I think there's a link to that on the city's website. So if you don't have that, that's something you need to be familiar with. If you approve or deny something because it's either consistent with or inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, if that gets appealed for me, that's a pretty easy job to defend that decision, okay? If you deny something because I just don't like this person, I didn't like, what they said, and it's not one of these criteria, that becomes a difficult position to defend later in court. But I've listed what you should be considering: the comprehensive plan, the current conditions and character, the current structures and uses in the district, the most desirable use for which the land in each district is adapted, the conservation of property values throughout the jurisdiction, and responsible development and growth. This is another thing that staff and Sean's really good about, is when they make a recommendation for approval or denial, you'll see his reasons for this approval or denial, and he'll usually list things that are right out of the ordinance, especially when we see conditional use permits, or what are we going to call them now?
No, we're calling them that.
Okay. Special exceptions, especially when we see those, and I think people, we'll talk more about that in a minute, people have a hard time understanding that. But if you look at his report, he will go right down the ordinance and say they met all of these criteria in our ordinance. That's why I'm recommending it. He's not recommending approval because he likes the project. He's not recommending denial because he dislikes the project. He's recommending approval because they met the criteria we established that he has to look at in ranking a project. All right, again, I put in there, you should be familiar with our permitted use chart. Have y'all seen that in our ordinance? So if you look in the zoning section, you'll see a permitted use chart. Just be familiar with that. You'll hear people say object to spot zoning. And I think what people would think of if you had a big area that was all residential and someone wanted to put an industrial park in the middle of that, that's probably is spot zoning. But spot zoning has been redefined by the courts in recent years. Most of the area south of I-20, I believe, might be residential zoning now. But someone may come with a commercial use, and our comprehensive plan may contemplate that as the future use. So it's not zone that, but our comprehensive plan says in the future we see this area of the city changing and becoming more of this kind of use. And I just use that for example. I don't know if that's the case, but if our comprehensive plan recommends this part of the city changing to the use that's before you, that is not spot zoning. Even though that might be the first time we've ever zoned a parcel in that area to whatever that is, and it might be surrounded by other uses, that will, under Georgia law, that would not be spot zoning because that's following our comprehensive plan. But you'll hear people, anytime something like that comes up, you'll probably hear people from here saying, you can't approve that, that's spot zoning. Look at our comprehensive plan. Does it contemplate that use in that area of the city? If it does, then that is not spot zoning. On the other hand, if the applicant, it's not comprehended in the comprehensive plan, and it's only going to benefit the applicant, it's not going to benefit anybody else, then that probably is spot zoning. He's going to make some more money if you rezone it this area, but it's not really conductive or doesn't match everything surrounding it, then that probably is spot zoning. So, And if you ever have a question about something that comes up, you can ask my opinion on that, and I'll try to give you the best opinion I can. All right, variance. This is something that's going to be new to you guys, at least in the recent past. A variance is a request for relief from basically developmental standards such as setbacks, height standards. A lot of measurement type things are going to be variances. Some things we've seen a lot of in the last couple years, stacking variances. And so you'll learn what stacking is. If someone has a drive-through, that we require that their drive-through allow so many cars to back up there, not back up into the road. And there's a lot of parcels where you just can't get enough cars in there. So they ask for a variance to allow less stacking. You might see we don't allow drive-through windows in certain areas, so they may request a variance to allow a drive-through window. Those kind of things. So the use is actually permitted in the zoning, but they need some relief from the developmental standards. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And then again, our variance decision criteria, and I put that in there. So I think what you'll typically see is practical difficulty, and what you'll see in Sean's report, a lot of times if he recommends denial, he'll say self-imposed. Okay, and what he's meaning by self-imposed is they could actually get by without the variance, but maybe they'll make more money with the variance. And, it's driven by something that's not necessarily contemplated by our ordinances. So ask yourself, is this just being greedy, or is it something they really need? So is that an accurate statement? Okay.
So, like, for example, would that be similar to like what we saw with the rezoning request for Avamore? Well, they needed
No,
it because they would need
I
it
can't.
to
He may
change
have-
the PUD, right?
I don't know if he was a variance. He wanted to make some actual zoning changes. So
As well.
remind me about PUDs at the end, because I don't know that I addressed those. PUDs is a different animal in and of itself. Okay.
Helpful.
It would be more so if,
I can tell you an example we've seen recently. So a subdivision has been approved for 50 houses, but they realize if we put the driveways behind the house, we can fit in 85 houses. But we don't allow driveways in the back or rear, what we call rear loading. Or
Isn't there
if we use
one near a lake?
alleyways instead of streets, we can fit 110 houses in there, make even more money.
Is that a new thing? Because isn't there one in Mirror Lake?
There may be, but I'm just giving you examples of what kind of variances you may see.
Oh,
So
Okay.
those are the kind of things that you may see a recommendation of denial because it's self-imposed.
right.
You know,
Okay.
they've
that makes
got a
sense.
parcel that's designed, that is approved for a subdivision, and they can build a subdivision. They can build it without variances, but the variances help them put more houses, higher density. They always want higher density. I mean, that's always, and you can't blame them. I mean, they're in the business to make money, and the more houses they can put on a piece of property, the more money they make. I mean, that's, and they can't get it if they don't ask for it. So you can't really blame them for asking, but you've got to ask yourself, is this self-imposed? And sometimes, if they come to you and it looks like a great product, it may be fine to approve it, and they may recommend approval, that it's a better product with the variance.
Can you think of one situation when we wouldn't be making assumptions or guessing to say that something is self-imposed?
Usually you're going to have some information about why we've made that decision that it's self-imposed. Hopefully every time we can explain why we're saying it's self-imposed.
That can also be with a breakup of a parcel, like similar to the liquor store thing where that's self-imposed in a way because they could still build the liquor store if they don't get the variance, but if they get the variance, then they can put the liquor store, the gas station, right?
But the applicant can say, I can't build it, and it's always subjective. Because if the applicant just says, well, I can't do that because ABC,
Or the
you're
difference
just
in-
saying that they can. And it's just nothing.
Where it would not be self-imposed, a good example would be they hit rock.
Okay,
And physically, they cannot build a house
Without explosives.
15 feet
or-
from this property line. They need
Yeah.
to move it over 2 feet.
Mhm.
Hopefully, we would be coming and saying, that is not self-imposed. The topography dictated that they
Yeah.
need this variance. The project behind us, they asked for a variance to encroach on the city buffer requirements to the streams. And I can't remember what our recommendation was, but I think the topography of that land was they really couldn't fit in certain part of the project without that. And then you obviously can get into some areas that one could argue it's self-imposed and one could argue it's necessary. Hopefully, it's a clear line when it's absolutely necessary.
Like when it comes to profitability, like if you could interpret something as them just being greedy and wanting to attract customers from one business to the next business, or you could say, well, this ability to attract customers from a neighboring business ensures a level of profitability that would allow the business to be
Yeah.
built or sustainable, whereas like something else might not, right?
Yeah, and in my mind, I'm kind of going back to the Waffle House example too, where it really wasn't a profitability issue for them. It was their business model, was their parking spaces. So, and we got there through question and answer and kind of going through the process. We resolved back to, could they do a site plan where they moved some things around and took away a parking spot or two? Yes, but that's not their business model.
Yeah, and it could be self-imposed, and you could still recommend approval. That doesn't mean you have to recommend denial. There could be, Waffle House is a great example. Their parent company says, they've got maybe three or four floor plans, and you have to build it this way. And this parcel, theoretically, I guess somebody could build something on it, but nobody's built on it for 20 or 30 years. And it was shaped such that probably nobody ever would, but you had somebody that's willing to do something. It's something the neighbors would like. So, yeah, we could say it's self-imposed, but it also is probably a pretty good use for the property. And that's a good reason to grant the variance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you grant variances, that is a good time for you to state that you want to put conditions on the approval. Okay? And a lot of times you will hear a developer from right here say, oh, I'll do X, Y, and Z. Will you commit to that as a condition of our approval? That's different than promising one thing. Because if you see the renderings of any subdivision, they look wonderful. I mean, any neighborhood project we've ever seen, the concept drawings, I'd move there in a heartbeat. But the finished product looks nothing like the concept plan. So if they promise something, let's get them to commit that that's a condition of approval. And this is more of a council issue. Let's put it on the final plat. Because I've recently finished some litigation where a developer said he's going to do X, Y, and Z, didn't put it on the plat, didn't do it, and say, you approved the plat without those conditions. We end up having to litigate those issues in court, which costs the city lots of money. But Joe, there's a couple of people on council that are good about asking the developers, will you commit to making that a condition? So don't be afraid to get them to commit. If they're promising something, don't be afraid to ask, will you commit to making that a condition? Or are you just making that your condition of it? We recommend approval with X, Y, and Z conditions. All right, special exception use or conditional use permit. Okay, that's what we're calling it now, conditional use permit? All right, so I'll need to update my presentation. They are the same thing. You will see these words used interchangeably throughout zoning legal decisions, different cities. But if you look at our permissive use chart, you will see some uses that, so the table's in 4.3, section 4.03. You'll see certain uses that are allowed in certain zoning areas. So, for example, I think I put an example of sanitary landfill. It's permissible in I-2 in the city. So an applicant, they want to build a sanitary landfill. Although it's permissible use, our ordinance says they still have to come for approval. They can't buy a parcel in I-2 and just come in and ask for a land disturbance permit and start building. They have to get specific approval for that use within that zoning category. This is an area I think that confuses the public more, and everybody, not just the public, council, decision makers in every city more than anything. But the criteria is listed in our ordinance, and you will pay special attention when someone comes before you with one of these to Sean's report, because he has been very good about going through and stating why he recommends approval. I think that a good example where one got off track was probably a vape shop. At least one of them, where somebody was, I guess those require special exception permits? Okay, so those require a conditional use permit, or what we're calling special exception use permits. So they had to come before council, and Sean would catch a lot of heat because he would recommend approval, and he was recommending approval because they met the distance requirement. They met all the requirement that were required under the ordinance. It wasn't that he was advocating for this use, but lots of questions were asked from the podium. Why do we need a special exception for this? You know, why? And those were ultimately denied, I think, by council, and they weren't appealed. But if those are areas that we got to be careful, if we're allowing it as a special exception use, and they meet the criteria under our ordinance, why are we denying it? You know, we've said under our law, our ordinance is our law, that we're going to allow it in this category, but you got to meet X, Y, and Z conditions. So someone comes before us and they've met X, Y, and Z conditions. You know, we've got to ask ourselves, why are we denying it? And there may be a legitimate reason, but we need to be careful about why we're denying those decisions, because those could be appealed. And if there's a problem there, that's when you talk about rezoning and updating our ordinance. If we're seeing things that we're having to approve because they're meeting our ordinance, but we really don't want that here, that's when we need to say we need to relook at our ordinance and update that.
So I guess I'm going to ask the question that apparently council and asks all the time. How do you know when a conditional use permit is required?
You will,
Right, because what I'm reading is the applicant owns a parcel in I-2,
yeah, I'll pull up.
applies for
Can
the
you pull up
landfill.
use chart?
Yeah.
All right, we'll show you an example.
I mean, to me, it kind of makes intuitive sense that if you're, for a landfill, for instance, that it could never be anything other than a landfill,
Yeah.
right, after that.
Well, if you look at, I wish I'd have put page numbers on here. If you look other considerations, so, you know, if it's going to be noise, there's some criteria you can recommend denial. Let's go down to the use chart, permitted use chart. Section 4.03, I think. Can you click on the side there at 4.03 and will it take you right to it?
So it seems like they're well defined for each
If you look there.
zoning area. Okay.
So, don't mind me, so up top you see AG, so that's agricultural zoning, R1, residential 1, R2.
Yeah.
Single family attached, multifamily 1, multifamily 2, commercial business district, commercial mixed use, C1, C2. So you see all those are the different zoning districts in the city. And then below it, you'll start seeing all kind of uses. And you'll either see a dash or a dot. If you see a dot, then it's allowed in that district. You see the S's here?
Yeah,
special
So in ag, an animal boarding and stables is allowed with a special use permit or conditional uses. We may have to change our S's to C's.
C.
So it's allowed in that district, but it has to get approval.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that there was
While
a.
we're here on this chart, and we were talking earlier about what Carrollton did with vapes. So they defined what a vape shop was in their definitions category. And we've got more than one definitions category, but you can just, if you pull this up on the website, up where it says C2, you can put definitions in it, it'll take you to our definitions. But they just put in a section here that said vape shops, and then they put dashes all the way across. Does that make sense? So that tells us they intentionally contemplated that as a use, and they decided we're not gonna allow it in any districts.
Thank you.
Can someone take this though and then appeal, because let's talk about so and so and so and so and all these where it's not being enforced? They may need a whole nother, so.
I don't think that's gonna be a good argument in court.
Okay,
What we're gonna see in reality is rarely are we sued when we approve something. I say rarely because I'm still in litigation where we approved a project, but we approved it with certain conditions that they didn't want to be stuck with. So, but most of the time, it's going to be, we've just denied the project completely. They've got 30 days to appeal that or file. It's not called an appeal anymore, but that's basically what it is. They appeal us to Superior Court, and we go from there. What I didn't address with council was a couple things that I've added. Annexations, there are different kinds of annexations, but y'all may see sometime in the future an annexation request with a rezoning request. So what the law says on that is if someone wants to annex, they have
is that like the C2 with the I2 on the same parcel?
No, and annexation is going to be a parcel that's actually not part of the city. It's in the county.
Okay,
So it could either be in Douglas County or Carroll County, but it's usually going to be abutting the city. There has to be some connection to the city. And what we will typically see
Van Wert
is 100
behind
what we call-
Avamore.
Yeah, what we'll typically see is what we call 100%
Okay,
type annexation. That means all of the property owners are asking for this annexation. There are other kinds of annexations, but I think that's what you'll see, the 100% method. So if I own a parcel, I'm the 100% owner of the parcel, I can petition to annex within the city by myself, and I don't need anyone else to help me apply for that. If it was multiple parcels, then there's different ways of handling the annexation. Annexations themselves are completely discretionary. So there's no criteria. You can say no just because you want to say no.
Is there a distance range?
They need to be touching the city. Like, we couldn't annex a parcel that's, yeah, it doesn't have to be much. And when I say
Okay. 'Cause
touching,
I feel like Douglas County annexed in tributary.
if you look at our,
Doesn't touch it.
if you look at our map, you'll see some parcels that don't look like they touch,
Like Ithaca.
Well, yeah, Douglas County,
but from the road.
annexed industry because they wanted them business to bring the taxes
Yeah.
to Douglas.
Right.
Yeah,
County.
there are some parcels that connect legally. I mean, there's some stretching going on, but they
Right.
connect by road and some other ways to the city. So,
Uh-huh. Okay.
So you could connect by road.
yeah,
Contiguous. Wow.
and you'll usually see those growths along utility lines. So they'll follow our water system or those type of things. So, and a lot of times someone's wanting to annex in because they want the services that a city offers that they can't get in the county. Also, in the county, you've got to have 4 acres to build a house. In most cities, you don't need that. So that might be a reason that I, as owning a piece of farmland in the county, may want to annex in the city, because I've got a 2-acre parcel. I can't build a house on it without getting approval from the county. Or maybe I've got a 10-acre tract that I want to put 5 houses on. I could not do that in the county because I have to have 4-acre parcels. I could do that in the city. So there's different reasons. But my point is, I've pointed out the criteria that's in our ordinance for approval or denial of things. With an annexation, you can deny it because for any reason. Yeah, hopefully that's not why, but you could. And hopefully you're giving, and I think everybody has consideration to all of these projects, because somebody spent probably a lot of money to get to the point where they're presenting something to you. And they've put a lot of thought and time and effort into it, and I think they deserve consideration. But I'm not saying they always deserve approval, but at least hear them out, and just because your stomach's not feeling well, that's not going to be a reason to deny them that day, okay? And I don't think anybody would, and no one ever has here. But when it gets before council, the rezoning is actually taken up before the annexation, so the property's still part of the county somewhere, and they're going to have to approve or deny the rezoning request before they approve or deny the annexation, which seems backwards. But the reason it's done that way is if they deny the rezoning, the applicant's probably going to want to withdraw the annexation request. So it gives them an opportunity. You don't want to rezone property and then get denied the annexation. And really, it wouldn't work because we can't rezone property in the county anyway. But so the rezoning is contingent upon approval of the annexation. But y'all could have a project that comes before you where a developer's saying, I'm asking you to annex in this parcel, and I'm also asking you to rezone it from this category to that category. So you could see that type of project. You apply different criteria to those 2 different parts of the application. Okay? You apply the zoning criteria that's in the outline and that's in the ordinance to the zoning decision. You apply whatever standard you want to the annexation.
So that means, so just to be clear, so you are outlining 2 different processes there. One is wherein the county approves a zoning and then they come to us for an annexation? No.
Yeah. What you're typically going to see is somebody owns a tract of property that's in the county.
Mm-hmm.
The county's most of the county properties that abut the city are either residential or agricultural. Not sure if there are any others. I'd have to look at the map, but that's typically what they're going to be currently zoned at. So they may come in and say, I want to be rezoned. If they're agricultural, they're almost always going to ask for some kind of rezoning.
Yeah.
Because if they wanted to just keep a farm, they're just going to stay in the county. Okay. So they're wanting to do something different with the property typically. So they're typically going to be asked for rezoning. And they would be asked for rezoning from us, so one of our zoning categories,
Okay.
not one of the county categories. And when an application comes in, we send a notice to the county. This person's asked to rezone this property. We have to look at who's providing utilities to that parcel. There's all kind of things we have to look at a staff level. We notify the school board because it could affect the school system. But all that is done kind of in the background before it comes to you. But y'all would be, you just may be asked to make multiple decisions on one project. Just apply the criteria for each part of that decision making that are appropriate. So for a zoning decision, apply the zoning criteria. If they're asking for zoning, variances, and annexation, you have to go through all of that. Does that make sense? Okay. PUDs is not in my outline, so a PUD is an interesting animal, and you don't see it everywhere. We have several PUDs. Mirror Lake is probably one of the largest PUDs, if not the largest in West Georgia. So a PUD, someone comes in with usually a large tract of land. Doesn't have to be, but it's usually a large tract. And they come in and basically say, I want to do this project. And your zoning really doesn't address that. So someone that wanted to, within one parcel of property, wants to put residential homes, a commercial business, multiple different uses within one parcel, they may be asking for a PUD, and a PUD is basically their own zoning category. So they come in with a PUD document really that explains what they're asking for, and if that is ultimately approved, that is the zoning for that property. They've created their own zoning category. So we see those occasionally, not a lot. We've got several in the city, and they may change their mind because PUDs are expensive typically because you're talking about big projects. I think we were talking earlier that, most projects, they're not profitable until about the third developer. So we can see these projects change over the years, and they want to amend the PUD. So that is basically a rezoning. I mean, that's basically what we're doing is we're changing the zoning inside the PUD. So those may come before you. And we have a specific category under our ordinances that deals with PUDs, and there can be minor changes that can be changed on the staff level, but those are really minor. Most of them would be considered a major change that would need approval from a recommendation from this body and approval from council. All right, is that enough for tonight? Any questions, or y'all want to get home to your families? Did that help at all?
Yes.
All right. If you've got any questions, email me, call me at any time. So I'm happy to respond.
Thank you. Do I have to do anything?
Somebody want to make a motion to adjourn? Or can I make a motion to
Yes.
adjourn?
You can.
I move to adjourn.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye. Unanimous.
What's that?
I said, I guess.